A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" And when they'd gotten into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they came to the land at Gennesaret, and after the people of that place recognized him, they sent word throughout the region and brought all who were sick to him and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. There's a lot in this reading, and what jumps out for me today, first of all, let me say today's a particularly busy time outside, so if we hear the sounds of the city, I encourage you to just be glad that the word comes to us in the midst of our actual lives. But with today's reading, what strikes me is two things. When we are afraid, we usually have the good sense to reach out to God. But then we get this story in the middle with the disciples who, of course, what they're seeing is actually Jesus coming toward them. They're afraid of him, which is a perception in error, but it's not understandable that they would be confused that somebody was walking across the water towards them. They cried out in fear, and then they start to micromanage God. They start to micromanage Jesus. Well, if you really are God, then have me come out on the water towards you. Jesus says, okay, God meets us where we are, right? Okay, I'll have you do that. Come on. So Peter gets out of the boat, is walking on the water successfully, until he notices and looks down and thinks this isn't supposed to be happening. He freaks out and starts to sink and cries out, "Help me." Jesus helps him and gets back in the boat. I think this is such a human story, which is we usually have the good sense as people who are aware of God to cry out to God in our moments of crisis, deep despair, fear, unexpected things coming our way. We sort of instinctively call out for God in the midst of that often. And then pretty much immediately start trying to micromanage God's response to us, right? This is, okay, God, well, I think that if this is really real, and if you're really going to help me, I want you to do it this, and that way. And God often will meet us where we are. But at the end of the day, what Jesus says to Peter and says to you and me is just believe. Oh, person with just a little bit of faith, it's enough. Just trust that I have your back and reach out to me. And indeed, as the disciples go ahead and safely land at Gennesaret and the word of Jesus as a healer spreads, it's interesting, those people who didn't have the closer relationship with Jesus, who weren't thinking, well, okay, laying out tests and preconditions and all that Peter tried to do, they just heard about Jesus and came and brought all the sick to him and begged to simply touch even the tiniest bit of him, not even his cloak, but the fringe of the hem of his cloak. They just knew if they could just reach out and touch God, that they would be made well. And so I think the upshot of this portion of Matthew's gospel for me on this day is to be reminded that when we call out to God and ask for help, it is enough not to have worked out all the plans and the preconditions for how God might help us, but simply to call out, "Help me, I'm drowning. Help me, I'm sick. Help me, I'm scared." And God, we can trust God to know what to do. God can take it from there. God can do the rest. So may God bless you this day and keep you and help you to keep in mind that we don't have to work it all out and lay out and micromanage God. God knows how to help us if only we ask. May God bless you and keep you this day and always. Amen.